Hey guys. So, yeah, first thing to talk about, picking up from last week, is Ren and Yo basically find themselves face to face with the last of En's royal guard, who, as is revealed in the episode, as Pyron's master, Shaman. And yeah, I'll be honest, even though the fight itself is a little is definitely like shorter compared to the original anime. I think the original anime might have extended it somewhat. I definitely like this particular reveal and fight a little bit more in the reboot than I do the original. The original, because well, the other one was pretty well done. I feel there's a little bit more of an emotional punch to from this fight in how and how the just from how the previous episode carries over to this one, and just from and just in general being able to see in full through the previous episode the like depraved results of N's experiments in creating this army of the dead, and how just from seeing every twisted creation made by N and the Tao family, we can only imagine the methods used in order to bring Shaman back, because imagining any number of those scenarios make his return in this form and Anne's actions all the more like grotesque and horrific, because it just further pushes in that pushes in into this place where he isn't just reanimating life, there's no limit to how well that in the moment he wouldn't go towards bastardizing and perverting the very cycle of life itself if it means accomplishing his goal. And in itself, it definitely shows a lot more of the darker side to the whole idea of how shamanism works in this world. And I do love the look on Yo's face when Ren explains the circumstances to him. Like, you can see the realization of just how inhumane the pretty much whole idea of pretty much shamanism in the world can be, and how it can be twisted into something that grotesque. Like, and just the realization of just the kind of situation he's thrust himself into. But even more so than that, I like how June had resolved herself in this episode, and she said that even though she wanted to avoid fighting altogether, that she did realize there are some things you can't walk away from. And but also when but also the other thing to talk about here is that when we do meet Ren's grandfather and mother, it takes the time to show to us that yes, the Tao family have done horrible, unspeakable evils and inhumane deeds. That's just a fact of what they've done, and we can perceive that as such through basically what we're seeing. But at the same time, as Ren's grandfather also puts it, in the moment, it was the only way in which they saw in the moment and at the time, it was the only way in which they saw an ability in order to survive. Like, they were, again, the Tao family, for pretty much all of its evil deeds, were pretty much thrust into exile. So they needed a way in order to protect themselves, even if it was an inhumane way. And again, in that sense, it doesn't excuse any actions from them, but at the same time, there is an aspect where you can't understand why they did it. And in that sense, in that sense, we also see that reflected in the battle with En himself, and how, unlike with Ren, who was able to overcome his anger and rage of the world and find purpose beyond it, En was so consumed by his anger at the world that it not only consumed him, but he had found no other purpose in life beyond the legacy and the history of the Tao, to the point where it became the very thing that defined him. Like, the history of the Tao to him was the only thing that was the only thing that was the only thing that ever really mattered in his life. And while his actions, and while En's actions specifically should never be forgiven, his defeat ultimately has provided him the opportunity to find a little bit more clarity. And I do love how the way Ren ultimately defeated his father does not only reflects how Yo saved him, but that En still had despite Ren defeating his father, En still has to decide for himself where to go from here. So I do like how Ren didn't necessarily save his father. He has to choose for himself whether to reject the Tao legacy as it exists or not. Which the series does leave it fairly ambiguous to us whether En actually changes. Like there is a small glimmer of a change there, but it's still. I do like how it still ultimately how En still ultimately chooses to trust the future of the Tao to Ren by giving Ren his sword, which again is I think is the best route to go with En's character, because there's only so far you can take the redemption idea before you need to just let the character themselves work through it themselves. But again, at least En had recognized Ren's beliefs, and this is like his first step towards that kind of change in perspective. It isn't fully 100% there, but yeah. Now, with that said, once again, I have to, even though I love this episode and I love the fight with En, I do still have to say there are aspects to the fight that once again feel it's weird, because even though this episode had adapted the manga pretty much page for page, there are aspects to the fight that once again feel a little rushed. But more than that, this episode I think finally kind of gave me clarity on one other issue I've been having for a while now, but can never really fully figure out, which is that about the fights in general in the reboot, and which is that aside from the one with Faust and the whole fight with Togegero, it feels like the studio is really having a problem in setting the right tone or atmosphere for these fights by not giving them it's either just not giving them enough time to sit and just and for us to soak it in, but also oddly enough through the soundtrack as well, because it wasn't until this episode where it finally clicked in me, but the music in this episode feels really off, and it doesn't feel like it pretty much matches with it doesn't match with the fight within at all. Like it's like it doesn't feel like it perfectly it syncs up. Like usually in a good soundtrack, it'll sync up perfectly with what's going on, and it'll create this sort of emotional atmosphere, so to speak. But the music is not syncing up with the fight, honestly, in this episode. I don't know why that is. But I think the only time during this episode I felt that the music, that the soundtrack and what was going on kind of matched together was the scene when En's spirit form was broken and his true self was revealed. But even then, it's one of those things where I think Bridge is almost too committed in order to adapting the manga, and rather than and not allowing certain aspects of the manga to sit in a single moment and let scenes have more time to breathe. They're just kind of they're just doing it scene for scene for scene. There's not enough time to really let a moment breathe, I think. And again, I think that this is probably where the whole problem with doing 52 episodes is starting to become a problem, because you do still need at least just a little bit extra time in order to sit on a moment and let us kind of emotionally soak it in. But this episode didn't really entirely do that, honestly. I do admit, though, one thing I like about this fight that I never realized before either, though, is En's basically teaching our heroes a lesson that not many shonen protagonists learn ever, which is never announce when you're going to attack or what it does. Just go for the kill. I kind of appreciate the episode for that. But yeah, guys, that's all I got for this review. If you enjoyed the video, like, comment, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, Analyst, Crunchyroll, and be sure to hit the notification bell for the notification button as well. And just share it around, guys. Dead Night of Me, signing off. Later.